bursts. She asked, "Will you stay if I undress?" The cowboy's darkest night in Blackwater Creek. Jake rode into Blackwater Creek just as the last rays of sunlight were fading behind the trees. Breath. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves and smoke from chimneys scattered across the small town. The creek that gave the town its name whispered softly through the woods, its water reflecting the dim orange sky. Jake's horse, a tall, strong chestnut, trotted steadily, sensing its rider's tension. Jake himself was quiet, his face shaded by a worn cowboy hat. His eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon, but there was a shadow in them, a shadow that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Blackwater Creek was a town where everyone knew everyone. It had one main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a small saloon, and a church whose bell rang every morning and evening. Though it looked calm, there had been trouble lately. Livestock had been disappearing, fences were being torn down, and no one knew who was behind it. Jake had heard the rumors before arriving. He didn't usually get involved in other people's problems, but something about this place drew him in. Maybe it was the quiet strength of the land, or the thought that some people here needed him. Whatever it was, he hadn't planned to stop riding yet. Here he was, walking into the heart of trouble. He guided his horse to the stable behind the general store, where a few townsfolk were already bringing in their animals. The stable smelled of hay and horse sweat, a comforting smell that reminded Jake of the years he had spent on ranches far from towns like this. As he tethered his horse, he noticed a woman arranging supplies inside the store. She moved with a purpose, her hands quick but careful. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes had a sharp intelligence that seemed to take in everything at once. She looked up when Jake entered, and for a moment, the world outside the store seemed to stop. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. Jake tipped his hat slightly. "Just passing through. Heard the town's been having some trouble." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, and she studied him as if deciding how much to trust this stranger.
"You've heard right. Things haven't been easy."
"Bah."
"Who are you, exactly?" "Name's Jake. Just a cowboy passing through."
"I help where I can," he said simply, his voice calm but carrying a weight that suggested experience and caution. She nodded slowly. "I'm Emily. I run this store, and more or less everything else in town."
"Trouble likes to follow people who don't belong here. You'd better decide quickly if you want to stay or leave."
Jake gave a small, almost invisible smile. There was something about her confidence that intrigued him. Most people didn't speak so directly to him. Most people avoided strangers. Emily was different. She seemed to notice things that others missed, the tension in his shoulders, the weariness behind his eyes, the quiet way he assessed a situation before acting. "I might stick around for a while," he said, moving toward the counter. "If you don't mind." Breath. She continued arranging items on the shelves but kept glancing at him. Finally, she spoke.
"You can stay, but if you plan to help with the trouble, you better be ready."
"People here don't take kindly to outsiders meddling without reason." Jake nodded, not offended by her caution. He liked that she didn't rush to trust him. It reminded him that not everyone would see him as just a wandering cowboy. Brit. Some people would see the real him, or at least try. That evening, Jake walked through the town, listening to the quiet sounds around him. Children were already inside their homes. Dogs barked softly, and the occasional wagon creaked as it rolled down the main street.
He stopped at the saloon, its wooden sign swinging gently in the wind.
The inside smelled of coffee, old wood, and faint whiskey. A few men were playing cards near the fireplace, and the piano in the corner played soft, cheerful music. Aim. Jake found a seat at the bar, nodding to the bartender. "Evening," the bartender said. "Attila. You new in town?" Jake nodded again.
Just came through,
Heard about the trouble around here. The bartender leaned in slightly.
You planning to help or just watch? Jake's lips tightened. Depends.
I don't like leaving people to deal with things alone if I can help. The bartender chuckled softly. Fair enough. Blackwater Creek doesn't get many people who care enough to step in. Most just pass by. Jake sipped his coffee in silence, letting the warmth fill him. His thoughts drifted to the rumors about livestock being stolen, fences broken, and the fear that had settled over the town. It wasn't just about money or animals. It was about trust, about people feeling safe in the place they called home. Jake understood that kind of fear. He had lived with loss before, had felt the world turn its back on him more than once. Helping these people wasn't just about solving a problem. It was a chance to be part of something again. Break. Later, as the sun disappeared completely and stars began to twinkle over Blackwater Creek, Jake stepped outside. The chill in the air made him pull his coat tighter. He walked toward the general store, finding Emily sitting on the porch steps, a lantern casting a warm glow on her face. She looked tired, but her posture was straight, and her eyes were alert.
"You're still up," Jake said, keeping his voice low. "I like to check on things at night," Emily replied.
The creek can be unpredictable, and so can people. Belle. She paused, then looked at him directly.
"You really plan to stay?" Jake hesitated.
He had spent years drifting, avoiding attachments, avoiding responsibilities that might tie him down. But something about Emily, about this town, about the need he saw around him made him reconsider.
I think I will, he said finally. Emily studied him for a long moment.
Bruce. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Good. You might be just what this town needs, if you don't scare easily. Jake chuckled softly. I've seen worse than Blackwater Creek. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the gentle rush of the creek nearby and the distant hoot of an owl. It was a calm moment, one that felt rare in Jake's life. He realized that he hadn't felt peace like this in years, not since before the hardships that had shaped him into the man he had become. Round. Suddenly, Emily spoke again, her tone a mixture of curiosity and challenge. You ever think about staying somewhere for reasons other than work? For reasons that have nothing to do with trouble or fixing things? Jake looked at her, surprised. He wasn't used to people asking questions like that. Most people wanted to know about his skills or his past, but this was different. This was about life, about choices, about letting someone in. He thought for a moment before answering, carefully, as if testing the words in his mind. I've thought about it, he admitted. Not often. But sometimes, maybe! Emily nodded slowly. Sometimes, that's the hardest part. Deciding to stay when leaving is easier. Jake didn't answer immediately. He watched the lantern light flicker across her face, saw the determination and quiet strength in her eyes. He realized that staying here might mean more than just helping with a town problem. It might mean opening himself up again, letting someone see him fully, trusting that they wouldn't run away when they saw the scars he carried. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt a small spark of hope. The kind of hope that makes you believe a place, a person, or even a moment could change your life if you let it. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Emily understood that silence could say as much as words sometimes, deepened, and the sounds of Blackwater Creek settled into a gentle rhythm. Horses snorted softly in their stalls. The creek whispered over rocks, and the wind rustled the trees like a soft lullaby. Jake finally rose from the steps, tipping his hat to Emily. "I'll see you in the morning," he said simply. Emily nodded, her expression unreadable but not cold. "See you then." "Don't let the night get the better of you." Jake walked back to the stable, feeling the weight of the day in his bones, but also a curious lightness he hadn't felt in years. He brushed his horse down, fed it, and then settled into the small cabin behind the store that had been offered to him. Outside, the moon rose over Blackwater Creek, casting silver light across the land. Jake sat on the porch for a while, letting the night wash over him, thinking about the town, the people, and Emily, the woman who seemed to see more than anyone else ever had. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a stranger passing through. For the first time, he felt like he might belong somewhere. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Blackwater Creek woke slowly, the sun spilling soft light over the rooftops and the creek that wound through the town. Jake stepped outside his small cabin, breathing in the crisp morning air. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke filled his lungs, calming him in a way he hadn't expected. His horse was already waiting, stamping its hooves, eager for the day. Best. Jake mounted smoothly and rode down the main street, observing the town as it began its daily rhythm. Emily was already outside her store, sweeping the wooden porch. Her braid swung over her shoulder as she moved quickly but carefully, humming a soft tune under her breath. When she saw Jake, she paused and gave him a nod, a faint smile touching her lips.
"Morning," she said.
"Morning," Jake replied. She glanced down the street. Birds. "Looks like another quiet day, but I trust that peace with caution. You never know when trouble might show up in Blackwater Creek." Jake laughed softly. "Seems like that's what I heard." Emily tilted her head, studying him. "You planning to help with it or just watch from the sidelines?" "I plan to help," Jake said firmly.
If there's trouble, I won't just stand aside. She smiled briefly, impressed with his determination. Good.
Dispensive. "You'll fit in better than most, I think." The morning passed with small tasks. Jake helped mend a broken fence on Emily's property and checked on her livestock. The animals seemed to sense his calm presence, gathering around him without fear. "Yeah!" He noticed the way Emily moved among the animals with care and patience, talking softly to each one as if understanding their needs. It reminded him of the ranches he had worked on long ago, the rhythm of life that came from taking care of animals and land. As they worked side by side, the tension between them eased slightly. Emily asked about Jake's past in a cautious way, not pressing too hard but showing curiosity. He gave small, careful answers, revealing just enough to hint at his experiences without sharing the deepest pain he carried. He spoke about riding in distant towns, helping ranchers with stubborn livestock, and the quiet loneliness that often came with a life on the road.
Emily listened, nodding, offering small insights and understanding, but never judging. By late afternoon, the town's calm began to shift.
A neighbor came running toward Emily's store, shouting in alarm. "The creek? Someone's tampered with the livestock again." "Fences are down." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Show me." The three of them rode swiftly to the edge of the creek. The sight confirmed the worst. Fences had been torn apart, some animals had escaped, and tracks in the mud showed that it had been done recently. Jake dismounted quickly, scanning the area for clues. He noticed faint footprints, signs of someone trying to move quickly through the underbrush, and the subtle marks of tools used to cut the fences. Emily watched him silently, concern etched into her face.
You think it's the same people? Jake nodded slowly. Yes.
But someone is trying to scare you all. But it's more than that. They want control, and they're willing to risk the animals' lives to get it.
Her eyes widened slightly. Do you think they'll come back tonight?
Braff, we need to be ready. That evening, Jake helped Emily secure the fences, reinforcing weak points and setting simple barriers to guide the animals back safely. They worked quietly, the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows over the creek and the fields. Breath. As they moved among the animals, Emily glanced at Jake. "You know," she said softly, "most people wouldn't stick around to deal with this kind of trouble." They'd ride away and leave it for someone else. Jake paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Most people don't care enough," he said. "I do." Emily smiled faintly, touched by his honesty. "I can see that." Night fell, and the storm clouds gathered above. The wind howled through the trees, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Jake and Emily moved the last animals into a small barn near the creek, making sure each one was safe. Inside the barn, the warmth of hay and the smell of animals created a comforting atmosphere despite the storm outside. Emily glanced at Jake, a little hesitant. "You don't have to stay inside if you don't want."
You can ride back to your cabin.
Jake shook his head. Breath. "I'm staying. I want to make sure everything is safe." She nodded, appreciating his dedication. For a while, they worked silently, securing gates and checking fences, the sound of the storm outside a constant reminder that the night could bring danger. Desks back, and the rain grew heavier. The creek swelled, its waters rushing with an urgent force, and the wind rattled the barn doors. Emily sat on a bale of hay, her eyes on the storm. Jake leaned against the wall nearby, his hat pulled low, listening carefully to every sound. Then Emily spoke, her voice soft but firm.
You know, most people run from nights like this.
The dark, the storm, the unknown. They hide, and they wait for it to pass. But you face it. Jake glanced at her. "It's not bravery," he said quietly. "Bration."
It's just necessary. If I don't face it, no one else might.
Emily's gaze softened. "It's more than that, though. Do you care? And it shows." The storm raged on, the barn shaking slightly with the wind. Emily moved closer to Jake, almost instinctively, seeking warmth and reassurance. Braith. She hesitated, then asked a question that caught him off guard. "If I asked you to stay with me tonight, really stay, would you?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a question of intimacy, but of trust, of whether he could be present when someone needed him most. He thought about the past, about the times he had left, about the pain of isolation, and about the strange pull he felt toward Emily. I'll stay, he said finally. Relief and gratitude softened her expression. Breath. "Thank you," she whispered. They spent the night in the barn, not talking much, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding, a quiet connection forged through the storm and the hardships of the day.
Jake kept watch near the door, listening for any signs of trouble, while Emily tended to the animals inside.
Occasionally, they exchanged words of reassurance, small gestures that spoke volumes about trust and companionship. By the time the storm passed, the first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds. The creek was still rushing, the ground muddy and slippery, but the town and its animals were safe for now. Jake and Emily stepped outside, breathing in the fresh morning air, soaked but unbroken. "You handled that well," Emily said, looking at him with admiration. Jake shrugged, a small smile touching his lips. "It wasn't just me. You helped too." She shook her head. I couldn't have done it without you. You're different, Jake. Most people wouldn't stay. Brave.
Most people wouldn't care, but you do.
Jake looked away, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. I've seen what happens when people don't care.
I don't want that for this town. Or for you. Emily's eyes softened, and for a moment neither spoke. The sun rose higher, casting light over Blackwater Creek, illuminating the town and the creek and the people who called it home. Jake felt a strange sense of belonging, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. First, as they walked back toward the store, Emily glanced at him.
You know, nights like that, they change things.
Britt, they show who you are, not just what you do. And now, I know something about you that most people never see. Jake looked at her, curiosity and caution in his eyes. And what's that? That you care, she said simply. You may be a loner, a wanderer, but you care. Breath. And that matters more than anything else.
He nodded slowly, taking in her words.
For the first time in a long while, Jake felt understood. Not just for what he did, but for who he was, for the choices he made, for the quiet strength he carried. The town of Blackwater Creek began its day, unaware of the danger that had passed in the night, unaware of the quiet bond forming between a cowboy and the woman who had dared to trust him. But Jake knew. And Emily knew. And that knowledge created a foundation of trust, of companionship, and of hope for what the coming days might bring. For Jake, this was more than a passing visit. This was a chance to be part of something, to protect something, and maybe to stay. And for Emily, this was more than a helper or a stranger. This was someone who had faced the storm, both literal and emotional, and had chosen to stay. Someone who might just become the person she needed in ways she hadn't expected. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the creek and the town, the barn and the fields. Jake and Emily moved through it together, side by side, ready to face whatever the next challenge might bring, knowing that sometimes courage was simply staying when leaving would have been easier. The days that followed were tense and exhausting. Blackwater Creek seemed peaceful in daylight, but everyone knew danger could return at any moment. Jake and Emily worked tirelessly, repairing fences, securing the livestock, and checking the edges of the creek where the animals grazed. Each day brought more evidence of sabotage, broken posts, fresh tracks, and signs that someone was watching the town closely. Jake grew more determined with each passing moment. Breath. Whoever was behind this would have to face him.
Emily noticed the change in him.
Jake was calm, focused, and deliberate, but there was an intensity in his eyes that had not been there before. He studied the creek banks, the surrounding woods, and even the townspeople as if trying to anticipate every possible threat. She admired his skill, his patience, and his quiet courage, but she also sensed the weight he carried. He wasn't just protecting the town. He was carrying the past with him, memories he didn't speak about, burdens he refused to share. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Emily came to find Jake near the creek. He was kneeling beside a section of broken fence, examining the ground. The mud was soft from the recent rains, and the tracks were clearer than before. "They came back," Jake said quietly without looking up. "Braze. Last night, or maybe early this morning. They were trying to move the animals again." Emily stood behind him, her hands resting on her hips.
Why do they do this?
Why hurt the town like that? Jake finally looked at her, his expression grim.
It's not just about the animals.
It's about control. Someone wants to scare people, make them feel helpless. When you take that away from them, you can manipulate them more easily.
Emily's shoulders tensed.
But that's cruel. Jake nodded. It is. But that's the world sometimes. People like that exist. And we have to be ready. She watched him in silence, feeling a mixture of fear and admiration. Breaths. She had seen many people face challenges before, but Jake faced them with a quiet strength she had never seen. He wasn't loud or boastful. Just as her pastor, he simply observed, planned, and acted when necessary. There was something about that approach that made her feel safe, even in the middle of danger. That night, a storm began to roll in, darker and stronger than the one before.
The wind howled through the trees, rattling the shutters of the general store, and the first drops of rain fell hard against the roof.
Emily moved quickly to secure the doors and windows, her heart pounding with unease.
Jake was already outside, checking the animals and reinforcing the barn doors. "You shouldn't be out there alone," Emily shouted over the wind.
"I'm fine," Jake replied, his voice steady. "But if someone tries anything tonight, I need to be ready."
She had seen his dedication, his courage, but she also knew that facing danger alone could be deadly. She wanted to help, but she also trusted his judgment. Passed with tense anticipation. The storm raged on, thunder booming across the creek and lightning illuminating the dark sky. Emily stayed inside the barn, watching the animals and keeping an eye on the windows. She could hear Jake moving outside, his boots crunching on the wet ground, his presence steady and reassuring even from a distance. Suddenly a noise came from the edge of the creek, a faint rustling, almost too quiet to hear over the storm. Jake froze, listening intently. Emily held her breath, her heart racing. A shadow moved through the trees, quick and deliberate. Jake didn't hesitate. He moved silently toward the sound, careful not to alert whoever was there. Emily watched him, her chest tight with worry. She had never seen someone so focused, so controlled, so fearless in the face of danger. The figure approached the livestock, trying to push them toward the broken fence. Jake stepped out of the shadows, his voice calm but firm, brief. The figure froze, startled. A brief struggle followed, but Jake's skill and strength were enough to stop the intruder without injury. Desk. He held the person firmly, his eyes sharp, assessing every move. Emily rushed outside, her lantern casting light over the scene. Jake released the intruder slowly, keeping a watchful eye. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The figure remained silent, fear and confusion in their eyes. Jake sighed, knowing that this was only the beginning. He tied the intruder safely but securely, then turned to Emily. "We need to find out who's behind this. They won't stop until they think they've won." Emily nodded, her mind racing. "And they could come back at any time."
"Yes," Jake said. "That's why we have to be ready."
But we're stronger than they are.
"Together we can protect the town." The storm continued through the night, but Jake and Emily worked side by side, reinforcing the fences and checking on the livestock. The shared struggle brought them closer, their trust growing with each passing hour. Emily realized that Jake was not just a protector. He was someone who cared deeply, who took responsibility, and who faced challenges head-on.
She had never met anyone like him before. By the time the storm passed, the first light of dawn was breaking over Blackwater Creek.
The town was safe for now, the animals unharmed and the intruder securely held for the authorities to find. Jake and Emily stood together, exhausted but relieved.
"You were incredible last night," Emily said softly. Jake shook his head, brushing mud from his coat.
"I just did what needed to be done, that's all." Emily smiled faintly, touched by his humility. "It's more than that. You faced danger when most people would run. You stayed when most people would leave. But Jake looked at her, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. I stayed because it mattered. Desperation. Not just the town, not just the animals, but you. Emily's cheeks warmed slightly, and she looked away, feeling a strange flutter in her chest. You don't have to say that, she murmured. I do, Jake said quietly. It's true. The days that followed were filled with planning and preparation. Jake and Emily worked tirelessly to secure the town, repairing fences, checking on the livestock, and watching for signs of trouble. They grew closer, sharing stories of their pasts, their fears, and their hopes. Emily learned that Jake had faced hardship and loss before, that he had been a loner for many years because he had been hurt in the past. But she also learned that he had a deep capacity for care and courage, and that he was willing to risk everything to protect the people and animals he had grown to care about. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily invited Jake to sit with her by the creek. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water and the trees. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the gentle rush of the creek and the distant sounds of the town settling in for the night. You know, Emily said softly, I never expected anyone like you to come here. Someone who would care so much, who would stay through everything. Jake looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. I didn't expect to stay either, but something about this place, and you, makes it different. Emily turned to him, her eyes searching his. Different how? Different enough. That leaving doesn't feel like an option, Jake said simply. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of relief and hope. She realized that Jake was no longer just a stranger passing through. He was someone she could rely on, someone she could trust, and someone who might just become an important part of her life. The night grew darker, but neither of them moved. They sat together side by side, sharing the quiet comfort of each other's presence. For Jake, it was a moment of peace in the midst of chaos. For Emily, it was a moment of understanding and connection that she had never experienced before. Suddenly, a distant noise broke the silence, a rustling in the woods, faint but distinct. Jake's eyes narrowed, his body tensing. He stood, slowly, moving toward the sound with careful steps. Russ. Emily followed, lantern in hand, her heart racing. They found nothing but broken branches and footprints leading deeper into the woods. Jake studied them carefully. They're testing us, he said quietly, by seeing how prepared we are, seeing how far they can push. Emily nodded, her hands gripping the lantern tightly. And we're ready?
Jake looked at her, his expression serious but calm.
We're ready! Together! That night, as they returned to the town, the bond between them had grown stronger. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and they had done it side by side. Emily realized that Jake was no longer just a protector. He was a partner, someone who could share the burdens of the world with her. And Jake realized that Emily was more than just a townsperson. She was someone who understood him, who trusted him, and who made staying worthwhile. The darkness of the night could be frightening, but together, they had found a way to face it.
And for the first time, Jake allowed himself to imagine a future where he didn't have to face it alone.
The morning after the storm, Blackwater Creek looked peaceful, almost like nothing had happened. The sun shone on the creek, the leaves shimmered in gold and orange, and the town slowly came alive. But Jake knew better. The calm was temporary. Best, whoever had been sabotaging the town hadn't stopped. They had only waited for the right moment. Jake moved quickly, checking fences and gates, making sure every animal was safe. Emily joined him, her hands busy but her eyes alert. She had learned to watch for signs, to anticipate trouble, and to trust Jake's instincts. Together they were methodical and careful, covering every inch of the creek's edge and every corner of the town.
They could strike at any time, Jake said quietly as he checked a gatepost.
We need to be ready, day or night. Emily nodded. We won't let them scare the town. Not again. The day passed in a blur of work, repairs, and watchfulness. Jake and Emily moved through the town side by side, reinforcing fences, securing barns, and calming the livestock. The townspeople began to notice Jake's dedication. Some watched from a distance, impressed but cautious. Most stayed busy with their own tasks, hoping the trouble would end. Jake knew it wouldn't. At least, not until they confronted whoever was behind it. As evening approached, the town was quiet, almost too quiet. Emily and Jake were preparing to check the last section of fencing near the creek when they heard it. A rustling in the trees, heavier than before. Brask. Jake's body went tense, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They're back," he said. Emily gripped the lantern tightly. "What do we do?" "We face them." He moved ahead, Emily close behind. The wind carried the sound of footsteps, low and careful, but deliberate. The intruders were no longer acting randomly. They had a plan.
Jake's eyes caught the flash of metal tools, the glint of something used to cut fences.
He signaled Emily to stay back slightly, ready to protect her while confronting the intruders. Suddenly, several figures emerged from the trees, startled by Jake's sudden appearance. He didn't speak at first. He studied them, noting their hesitation, their nervousness, and their willingness to risk confrontation. The figures froze, realizing that Jake was prepared and that the storm and night offered him no excuse for weakness. "Stop," Jake said firmly. "Step away from the animals now." One of them raised a hand, as if to argue, but Jake's gaze was unwavering. Emily stepped forward slightly, placing herself beside Jake, showing silent solidarity. Presence of both of them, calm but ready, seemed to shake the intruder's confidence.
You don't want this, Jake said again.
Bess, turn back and leave. No one here will harm you if you go now. But if you continue, I won't hold back. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The creek rushed nearby. The wind moaned through the trees, and the animals in the barns waited, sensing the tension. Slowly, one of the intruders lowered his tool, and the others followed. Jake's voice remained steady but quiet. Go, now. Leave Blackwater Creek. The intruders hesitated a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Jake watched until they were out of sight, then turned to Emily, exhaling slowly. They won't be back, he said, though the certainty in his voice was tempered by caution. At least, not tonight. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You did it. You stopped them. We did it, together. The night fell gently over Blackwater Creek, the stars shining above, the creek sparkling under the moonlight. For the first time in many days, Jake felt a sense of relief, a sense that the town could breathe again. Emily smiled at him, a small but genuine smile, and he realized how much he had come to care about this place, about her, and about being part of something that mattered. The next morning, the town was buzzing with cautious optimism. News of the intruders had spread, and the townspeople began to rebuild what had been damaged. Jake and Emily worked tirelessly, fixing fences, repairing barns, and ensuring every animal was safe. The townspeople began to offer small gestures of thanks, nods, waves, and quiet words of gratitude. Jake accepted them humbly, but his focus remained on Emily and the town.
You've changed things here, Emily said softly one evening as they walked near the creek.
People trust again. Animals are safe. And I think they even feel hope. Potentious. Jake glanced at her. I just did what needed to be done. Bye. That's all.
Emily shook her head gently.
Bah. It's more than that. You didn't just fix fences or guard animals. You reminded people that someone cares, that someone will stay when it's hard.
That matters more than anything else. Jake looked away for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in.
He had spent years alone, drifting, avoiding attachments, hiding from pain. But Emily had seen through that.
She had recognized the man beneath the cowboy hat, the man who cared deeply, who carried responsibility quietly, who faced challenges head-on without hesitation. As they reached the edge of the creek, Emily paused, looking at the water flowing gently over the rocks.
You know, she said softly, I never expected someone like you to stay.
Someone who would care enough to risk so much. Someone who would face the darkness instead of running from it. Jake studied the creek, thinking about the past days, the storms, the intruders, and the quiet moments he had shared with Emily. I stayed because it mattered, he said finally.
Not just for the town, not just for the animals, but for you. Bration. Emily turned to him, her eyes wide with emotion. For me? She whispered. Jake nodded slowly. Yes, you asked me to stay, and I did. Not just tonight, but for everything that comes after. I won't leave. Brace. The creek shimmered in the moonlight, the gentle rush of water echoing the rhythm of their hearts. Emily stepped closer, feeling the warmth of his presence, the calm strength he radiated. You've given this town and me something we haven't had in a long time, she said. Hope. Safety. Trust. Breaths. Jake reached out, placing his hand gently on hers. I'm here, he said simply, for whatever comes next, whatever challenges, whatever storms.
I'll be here. For the first time in years, Jake felt a deep sense of peace.
He had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty. He had protected the town and the people he had come to care for. But more importantly, he had allowed himself to connect, to trust, and to stay. The burden he had carried for so long, the loneliness, the isolation, the past wounds, began to feel lighter.
He realized that being part of something meaningful, of sharing life with someone who understood him, was worth more than anything he had known on the road.
Emily smiled, feeling the same sense of relief and happiness. The storm had passed, the intruders were gone, and the town was safe. But the true victory was not just in surviving danger. It was in the bond they had formed, the trust they had built, and the hope that now shone brightly for the future. They stayed by the creek for a while longer, watching the water, listening to the night sounds, and simply being together. No words were needed. Each understood the other perfectly. The events of the past days had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and shown them what truly mattered. And now, standing together in the quiet night, they both knew that they had found something rare and valuable. Connection, trust, and the courage to stay even in the darkest times. The following days were filled with rebuilding, but the mood in Blackwater Creek had shifted. People smiled more openly. Animals thrived, and the town slowly regained its rhythm. Jake remained a constant presence, working alongside Emily and the townspeople, always vigilant, always caring. But there was also a softness in him now, a willingness to be part of a community,
to share his life, and to allow himself to be seen fully. Emily watched him often, noticing the subtle ways he had changed, how he allowed himself to laugh, how he spoke gently to the animals, how he listened carefully to others. She realized that Jake had not only saved the town, but he had also allowed himself to be saved in a way, paced the darkness, and chosen to stay. One evening, as the sun set over Blackwater Creek, Jake and Emily stood on the porch of the general store, watching the town below. The creek reflected the orange and pink sky, and the air was calm and warm. Jake turned to Emily, his expression serious but soft. "This town, this place, it's changed me," he said quietly. "And so have you. You've shown me that staying, caring, and trusting is not weakness, it's strength." Emily smiled, her eyes shining. Breaths. "And you've shown me courage, loyalty, and the power of not giving up. I couldn't have asked for anyone better." Jake reached for her hand again, holding it gently. "Then let's face whatever comes next."
Emily nodded, feeling a deep sense of happiness and security.
"But together," she said. The night settled over Blackwater Creek, peaceful and calm. For the first time in many years, Jake felt that he belonged. He had faced storms, intruders, and the shadows of his past, and he had survived. But more importantly, he had allowed himself to be present, to care, and to stay. And for Emily, she had found someone who would stand by her, protect her, and trust her. The town was safe. The bond between them was strong, and the future looked brighter than it had in a long time. As they stood together by the creek, hands entwined, hearts steady, and eyes on the horizon, both knew one simple truth. Sometimes the greatest courage is not in running or fighting, but in staying, in trusting, and in opening your heart to what truly matters. Blackwater Creek was no longer just a town in trouble. It was a place of hope, trust, and new beginnings. And at its heart were Jake and Emily, two souls who had faced darkness and chosen the light together.